Hi, welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and subscribe if you like the video. Like the video, I really appreciate everybody's comments. Hoping to get a few comments about this one. In this video, I'm going to talk about force application. That's one thing I'm going to do. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about this new app that I've been developing since about February, since about when COVID hit. I was very interested in developing something that would allow me to see data remotely with clients using the Concept 2. And I always just wanted to see if I could do that. So what I've got here is Remote Rowing Coach. It's still in development. I'm still working on it, getting some feedback from folks who are beta testing it. Hope to have it out soon, but we'll see. I don't want to release it until it's really ready and really ready to go. So a couple of things, force application as well as having a look at this app. So what I'm going to do here is, you can see on the screen here, we've got the main menu. You're going to log in, create an account. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect this to the PM5 monitor. You need an iOS device, you need an iPad or iPhone, and you need a PM5, a later model of the PM5, so post 2016, late 2016 is when the chipset changed in this, and it allowed for force curve Bluetooth transmission to peripherals and things like that. And so I'm going to go ahead and link this up, and you'll see there that there's a remote coaching disabled. I'm not actually going to transmit this data to the cloud somewhere else because of the purposes of the video, but you can transmit it to the cloud and get that information somewhere else with the right security protocols. So I'm going to head and hit cancel and then row a few strokes here so you can see what's going on here. This screen gives you some basic metrics. So you get watts, you get pace, and you get drag factor displayed, the number of strokes and things like that. But what I want to focus on today is a little bit more on this screen, the force curve screen, that allows for that transmission of force curve. You can access the force curve on the PM5 monitor, and you hit the display button and it changes to a graph where you can see it. So you don't need the app to see that on the force curve, but this gives you another level of analysis. And so what I'm going to do here is talk a little bit about force application, kind of the continuum of force application. So there's two schools of thought in terms of how to apply force in the rowing stroke. One is this explosive beginning when you really try and hit the catch as hard as possible and explode off that front end and drive the legs down. And that's called Kernschlag, which is a German Democratic Republic term back in the 60s when they were studying force curves. That's that explosive beginning, and really it's kind of like a do all you can in the first time, get that high peak force, and then try and hold on for the rest of the stroke. So that's one, and it's sort of more associated with a very sequential drive. So legs, then back, then arms, and that's generally that's one application. The other end of the continuum is more of a it's a hard catch, but it's a more patient catch, and it's not explosive right off the front end. And then what you're doing is you start hard, you accelerate harder, and you finish hardest. So you're surging through that stroke and trying to accelerate the oar handle and send the puddle as much as possible. So the emphasis, if I can call it that, is more on connecting patiently and sending through, and that is what I coach. It has been shown historically to be a more successful force application strategy. It doesn't mean that Kernschlag isn't going to necessarily be successful. There are examples of rowers who have excelled at that. It's just, if you look at the data over time, and particularly in terms of how this force strategy has been applied, having that surging stroke and keeping force on the handle is more effective. So I'm going to row a few strokes here. I will say the caveat is it's kind of difficult to try and force your force curve. you generally kind of find a groove. So it's hard to do that, but I'm doing my best to try and simulate this for you on the app and show you how these different force applications work. So what I'll do here is I'll take a few strokes so you can get a general sense of how it works. If you start with just the front end, that force curve is kind of narrow because the x-axis is time or stroke length. So the shorter your stroke is, or the less, the lower the duration of your stroke, you get a pretty small curve. But if you take a longer stroke, what you get is you get a wider because the stroke length is longer. And what that force curve is what force is on the handle over that period of the stroke. And so essentially what you get is the force times distance is work. So the area under the curve is the work done per stroke. But what I'm more interested in here is more of a qualitative approach in terms of what is the shape of that curve and how you drive during the stroke, and what doing different things in the drive does to that force curve. So we're going to have a talk about that. So I'm gonna start with this first idea that I introduced, is Kernschlag, this explosive beginning. I'm going to do my best to create this. It's not what I normally row. I tend to row the surging stroke with the patient beginning, and that's the one I'm going to advocate for in this video. So I'm going to try and really hit that catch really hard and try and hold on and be a lot more sequential in my stroke mechanic, and we'll get a sense of what this looks like. So I'm going to get the wheel moving here, and then I'm going to have a go really hitting this catch as hard as I can go, and you'll see what the curve does. Okay, so here I go. All right, so that is a classic example of this sort of force curve. Typically, when you hit the catch really hard, you get this left leaning curve. Okay, and what's happened here is you get a very sharp increase in force application. But the second half of that stroke, you tend to get this, I'm gonna clear that. You tend to get this, if you look at this, you get a back half, the last third half of the curve tends to start to lose that curve. And so what's happening here is when you look at the back half of that curve, you get that, it's convex. You want to try and make the curve be as convex as possible. But on the downside of the Kernschlag approach is that, essentially it was, Harry Mon that said, Harry Mon was a coach, New Zealand coach, a very successful coach, and he said the energy expended at the catch isn't available for use later on in the stroke, or words to that effect. And so what you see there on this force curve is kind of this concavity here, because if I leave my arms and back in a sequential, I leave my arms to last, what happens here is that my arms can't keep up, so I lose connection with the wheel, and we get this concavity here, which is sort of classic. This, as I said, this is hard for me to row this stroke, so typically you would see this force curve lean to the left a little bit. But if you look at the beginning of that curve, what you see there is it goes up sharply, and then what happens is it actually kind of cuts across for a little bit there. And that's what happens when you try and overload the wheel on a Concept 2. What happens is you basically, this is inertia, right? So the wheel slows down in between the strokes, and what you get here is you can't keep that force continuous, so that force actually comes back at you. And it's like trying to push a heavy object or a car that's at standstill. You wouldn't just slam into that car at 20 miles an hour, run into it, because ultimately you've got to respect the inertia. And if the inertia is lower, there needs to be this more measured approach to taking and applying force at the beginning of that stroke. So what you get here is you get this little break here, and I'm going to go ahead and go back to that. And so you get that little break. I'm going to try and do it again. Just demonstrate it one more time. See if I can get that. So this is our Kernschlag approach. Again, tough for me to row because I don't normally do it. All right, I'm gonna try and hit it again. Yeah, so there you go. You see that, right? I get that nice sharp increase, but then I lose some because that energy comes back to me, and then that back half of that force curve tends to just kind of go straight down, and essentially, you know, I'm not adding any more value to that. Again, I think, you know, traditionally I would reach peak force a little bit higher, but this is hard for me to do because I do have that more gradual approach. So at this point in the presentation, you're probably wondering, you know, why I have a bike behind me. And so now I switch to the other end of this continuum, the surging stroke, and I want to talk a little bit about, you know, the physics of this and how this is a very effective way to apply your force in terms of how your boat speed is. So you are going to be judged on how fast that wheel is traveling at the end of the stroke. It might be traveling, you know, faster or doing well at the beginning of the stroke, but how well do you send that? And that's going to govern, you know, whether or not you win medals or not. That's how we're going to be judged. So in a boat, so the emphasis becomes not so much on hitting the catch and, you know, like a legs power 20, but a send power 20. So how are we sending that boat? How are we sending that wheel at the end of the stroke? And this is kind of a classic experiment where, you know, a bike wheel, if you think about moving this bike wheel, right? So if I go ahead and, you know, get that bike moving, the chain and all this gears acts as a pretty good analogy for resistance, water resistance or air resistance on the machine. And in order to keep this wheel going, first of all, I need to meet the wheel where it is in terms of speed. If I'm too slow and I'm not meeting the wheel at its velocity, and I stall there, the wheel slows down. The other trick here in terms of moving this wheel is in order to get it going, there's a little flick of the wrist off the end of the spin. So I'm going to get this wheel going, and in terms of keeping that wheel moving, I'm meeting it where it is. So I'm creating that connection at the beginning. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But I'm flicking the wheel away, and so the analogy here works pretty well for the rowing stroke in terms of surging through that stroke. So I'm going to show you my best effort at this surging stroke. At the beginning of the stroke, that first inch, what I'm going to do is be a little bit more patient. Okay, whenever you put the blade in the water, there's this moment, if you've been in there, of this. You can't just beat the water into submission. It's going to win every time. Water is very powerful. But if we take a little bit of time on that front end just to meet the wheel where it is, meet the boat speed where it is, kind of synchronize with that, and then after that first inch, and again, I'm not saying soft catch here, so don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying this approach, there is a hard catch. You need to be sharp, but there is this more measured, more patient pickup. And once you've got that connection, so if we started at 50% power for that, just that first inch, maybe first inch and a half, and then we accelerate to 100%. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing a more concurrent contraction of my body. So the way I coach it is, you know, there's discussions about should the arms be active, should they be passive, should we hang off them, and in terms of like how I coach this, if I get the athlete to think about engaging this whole chain rather than if we teach it legs, then back, and then arms, this whole chain, this idea of suspending the weight off the handle through the feet becomes a lot more effective. So if I use words, like words can be helpful to a point or they can be not helpful. And so sometimes when you're describing things and trying to get your rowers to understand, you know, you to understand how to pull that stroke. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to be patient for this first inch, and I'm going to work my back and my legs, my back and my arms together and try and work them concurrently, and then you're going to see what kind of a shape we're going to get out of this force curve. Ideally, what we're looking for is a haystack force curve, you know, parabola-esque, if you like. We don't want to get into the math of that, but this haystack, and the more symmetrical we can make that curve, the more we're able to continue that acceleration and not lose connection with the flywheel and the boat. And so I'm going to have a go at this and see if I can get this to work together. What you'll notice is if you want to play this video back at a slower motion, you'll see what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to finish my back and my arms together, and so work that concurrency. So I think it's important to get rowers to think about everything being engaged rather than just the legs and the core, and then we use the arms. So I'm going to have a go at this. Wish me luck. Hopefully I can get something that looks somewhat symmetrical. So here I go. All right, so as you can see, it's not perfect. And again, the goal here isn't for perfection. The goal is, you know, I don't want you to just watch this, but what you get is a much smoother curve. Yes, I'm losing a little bit of connection towards the back end. I said this is tough to do. And the reason it's so tough is that as you accelerate that wheel, what you get is a faster wheel. And so continuing to keep that force on the handle as you pry through becomes more and more challenging. And it's not so much an issue of strength, it's more of an issue of skill. Like, how do you keep that connection on? So what I'm going to try to do is a couple more here. That front end was a bit all right, so as you can see, I got that front end to work pretty well. There wasn't that big hitch in it. And again, it's not perfect, but I think you can see what I'm aiming for here in terms of this smooth application. I do lose connection a little bit towards the end, but ideally, what I want to work towards here is that smooth curve. So how do you achieve that? Well, I think it's a case of feeling the organic whole rather than trying to specifically do this with the legs and then do this with the arms, do this with the back. And again, I'm trying to record this video and explain this to you. And so, yeah, I am being a bit more conscious, but when I get on the machine, I tend to think in terms of, you know, how do I move from point A to point B, 2,000 meters, 10,000 meters as fast as possible, and focus on that hole and move in a way that shapes this curve in a way. So your homework after watching this video is to get on the machine. A Concept 2 is fine. Row Perfect has a force curve. Bio Rower, I think there's an app that has that as well. And just experiment with this and just kind of, what does it feel like to engage your arms, your back, and your legs at the same time and shape this curve in a very smooth fashion. And again, just being patient on that front end. So. Yeah, that wasn't too bad. That wasn't too bad. As you can see, it's a bit more symmetrical than the explosive catch. Now, as the rate comes up, it becomes more and more challenging to, you know, apply the legs, right? Because as the rate comes up, it's, you know, harder in terms of the pressure, and learning how to apply this force at the higher rate. It is very common, you know, for a lot of people for that curve to shift left once we get up to a high rate. So let me see if I can illustrate that at a higher rate. We go higher. Yeah, so I'm having trouble doing it. But as you can see, you know, I get that sharp increase and then I can't maintain it. And then that back half of that curve, it sort of flattens out a little bit. And there's some discontinuity. It becomes a little bit more triangular than it does the smooth haystack looking force curve. So, you know, I think that's enough discussion. I think you get a general idea. And I think it's this question of loading up the handle, being patient at the front end, surging through that stroke, and sending that stroke, sending the boat, sending the wheel, because what we care about is how does it feel, right? The science of this force curve, you know, gives us the science, right? It gives us the impulse, it gives us a graph, but what the rower can feel is that wheel accelerating towards the end of the stroke, and you know, we're looking for, there we go. Yeah, so we're looking for that smoother curve. So yeah, I understand that my curves were not perfect in this video. This is YouTube after all. And again, I don't row a perfect force curve every time, but I try and work towards an ideal rather than try to aim for perfection. So, you know, once you've got that data, we can go and have a look at that. So I'm going to go back to the main menu, and I'm going to view my training here. And that first training, the 1st of November, is right here. So I'm going to click on that, and the app gives you what you would expect, like the normal stats. It gives you training splits, of which there's just one because I didn't even reach 1,000 meters here. The data analysis portion of this allows you to you know, change distance and stroke rate, for example. So I can plot that, and there's my distance and stroke rate. So you can choose whatever variables you want. You know, you could do you know, average drive force, and let's go with drive length, for example. So you spend a lot of time analyzing the data to your heart's content here. You can export this data in a comma separated value file out of the app to do whatever you want with it, work with it in Excel, Google Sheets, whatever it is. You can also save the graph. So I'm gonna save the graph to the iPad photo library. And then you can also click the upload to logbook. I have the iPad on airplane mode, so I didn't get interrupted during this video, but if you click that upload to logbook, once you've got access to the Concept 2 logbook, you can upload that data. So very quickly your data goes up to the logbook, and you can do whatever you want with it, share it with your coach or whatever it is. The stroke analysis section here, this is the final thing, is a way to look at all of that stroke data one by one. You can move the dial here and look at that stroke data. It's got all that data for you. Your average and peak is a ratio of the average force for the whole stroke divided by what was the peak force. And the higher we can get that percentage, the more rounded that and more filled that force curve gets. I mean, obviously, in theoretical terms, a rectangular force curve is instantaneous application of force, holding that force throughout the whole drive, and at the end of the stroke, dropping off. And that's really possible to do. So, but the higher that average peak is, that gives you a general sense of how effective are you being at applying that consistent acceleration during that stroke, but also looking at the shape of that curve as the real clear indicator that you are actually accelerating, keeping force on the handle all the way through. Feed out drill's great for this because you need to maintain that connection with the footboard all the way through. So that's really effective to do. So that's Remote Rowing Coach. That's a discussion of force curves. Happy experimenting. I'm sure I'm going to get a bunch of comments from the community, I would think, about my Kernschlag comments, and being that the biomechanists say that's the way to go. I understand that. I'm looking at the way the history here as all of the data points. and then understanding that there's going to be differences. I understand I'm talking kind of in religious terms here in terms of rowing, but this is what I believe. This is my truth, and I've been pretty successful with this. I've always been a surging rower, maybe because when I was young in high school we rowed pairs a lot, and rowing those small boats really teaches you that touch, that feel about how to move that boat. And so I have been blessed in my time. I hope this video has been helpful to you, giving you some things to think about, and love your comments. You can find out more about my online training programs at coachbergmuth.com, or email me at neil@coachbergmuth.com. Happy to discuss with you the video, any help you might need with your training plans, any thoughts, that discussion, opposing views, all the rest of it is all valid, very important. Just again, showing my truth. Hopefully the video is helpful. This app will be out pretty soon when I can get it together. I want to make sure it's right before it goes out into public consumption. So thanks for watching. If you like the video, like the video. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and always love to hear from you. And if this has been helpful and you think it can help others, please share the video. I'd love to get a little bit more feedback on it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.